Welcome back to the Americas, Part 2, Mesoamerica, or Central America. We're going to be talking about the area through the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize, to the western section of Honduras and El Salvador. Let's start with the Olmec culture. The Olmecs lived in the low-lying Gulf Coast of what is now Mexico around 1200 to 400 BC. They lived in the sites of San Lorenzo and La Venta. Jaguars featured prominently in the Olmec art. Part of that had to do with a part of their mythology that said a union between a woman and a jaguar had produced a race of were-jaguars. So instead of werewolves, it was were-jaguars. The Olmecs liked to work in jade. We'll see actually several different cultures that liked the jade stone. They thought that jade had links to fertility and procreation. But let's talk about what the Olmecs are the most known for, and that's these colossal heads. This one is from San Lorenzo. It's made from a large basalt boulder that might have actually come from the Tuxtla Mountains around 80 miles southeast of San Lorenzo. Now, these heads were originally painted, so they actually had a lot of color on them originally. They tend to represent men, older men at that. Some of them have slightly crossed eyes. There are differentiations between the heads. So there's thought that these might represent rulers of San Lorenzo, or they might be various deities. Some of these heads actually were used as thrones. At San Lorenzo, they have found 10 colossal heads. The site was first excavated by the archaeologist Matthew Sterling in 1941, and later by archaeologists Michael Coe and Richard Dale in 1967. There's a close-up of that head. You can see the detail on the ears, the eyes, mouth, the headdress. And here's some other ones so you can kind of see and be able to compare and contrast there. So you can see all of these have different headdresses. Some of them different facial features. So here's a comparison. I know it's a bit fuzzy, but I thought it was a good comparison of the different sizes of the heads. And here's a head that was found in the ground. It's in situ. It's where it was found. So I thought this was also quite interesting. This is La Venta in Tabasco. This is part of the Olmec culture. There is a principal pyramid. There's also a ball court. We will get into the ball game later on, as well as burial mounds. That's the diagram, and there is the actual site. Here's the Kuntz axe. This is from, again, the Olmec culture. This is a were-jaguar, like I mentioned earlier. So in this case, we have a human infant with feline eyes and mouth. The idea is that this is probably a shaman of some sort. And yes, it is made out of jade. Now let's move on to the Mayans. So the Mayans are well known for their calendar. They had a 260-day ritual calendar. They also had an advanced writing system, and it consisted of pictorial symbols or glyphs that represent entire words or syllables. The Mayans had a very advanced understanding of time as well as astronomy. So we're going to see how those kind of combine here in a minute. Some of the big cities that we're going to be talking about are Tikal. That is in the eastern part of the Mayan civilization in what is now known as Guatemala. Palenque, that's in the west in what is today Mexico. And Copan in the south in what is now Honduras. So the Mayan civilization at its height had millions of people scattered throughout this vast region. This was divided into small independent city-states or kingdom. Each of these city-states were ruled by a lord or ahau who controlled the territory around the capital city and really tried to gain prominence for their city-state. Collapse of the Mayan civilization around the 10th century is still being analyzed today. Some of the possible reasons for its collapse include climate change, including drought and crop failures, overpopulation, as well as political unrest and war. Following this collapse, the Mayan civilization continued on the northern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, where Chichen Itza emerged as an important city. This is a Mayan hieroglyphic inscription. So this is actually from a lintel. So this would have been horizontal over a doorway, but it's being displayed vertically. Again, the hieroglyphics are a mix of pictographs, so they are stylized images of objects with phonograms, signs for spoken sounds. We can now translate about half of the characters of ancient Maya. On the calendar, they actually used these dark dots and dashes to mark units of time. A dot meant 1, a bar meant 5, and then they had place values in a base 20 system. This is the Dresden Codex. It's thought this was taken from Chichen Itza by Hernando Cortez in 1519 and presented as a gift to King Charles I of Spain. He's the one who financed Cortez's expeditions and appointed him governor of the Mexican territories. The manuscript was purchased for the Dresden Court Library in 1739 in Vienna as the Mexican book, that's in quotations. In 1853, it was identified as a Mayan manuscript. It consists of 39 leaves inscribed on both sides, approximately 140 inches long, or almost 12 feet long. So it actually originally was folded in kind of an accordion-like manner. The material in which it is written is a chalk-coated writing material called amatl. It's a paper-like matter produced from a fig tree fiber by means of soaking and beating. This is very much like some of the bark cloth that we saw in the African chapter. Again, it's kind of coated with a chalk substance. The codex depicts hieroglyphs and numerals and figures and contains ritual and divination calendars, calculations of the phases of Venus, eclipses of the sun and moon, instructions relating to New Year ceremonies, and descriptions of the locations of the rain god, which culminate in a full-page miniature showing a great deluge or flood. And again, this all is relating to the 260-day Mayan calendar. So the Dresden Codex became known as such because it was in the Dresden court since 1739. During World War II, there was a firebombing of Dresden in 1945, and the codex was badly water damaged. It was eventually restored and put back together. Unfortunately, it was put back in the wrong order. And because parts of this amatl paper and pigment actually adhered to the glass that it was laid under, it's thought that if they tried to fix it, they would lose part of the Dresden Codex itself. Interesting little fact, in the 1930s, some scholars realized that the codex contained a mathematical subtlety which allowed for the irregular timing of Venus's cycle around the sun, which is 583.92 Earth days. So they were actually including this very small change in their ritual cycles. So here is a detail of the Dresden Codex. Here's another one. And there's a close-up. So this is the ball court in Copan, Honduras. And we'll actually wait until a little bit later to discuss the ball game. The ball game is very important in many of these South and Central American cultures. The Princeton vase. Again, it's just named the Princeton vase because Princeton ended up owning this piece. This is actually the iconography of the vase all stretched out. This is actually what the vase looks like. So it is in a vase shape, but it is hard to see all the different elements. So let's analyze this. So we have an old god here sitting on a throne. We have two jaguars up here on the cornice. So this god here, this old toothless god, is known among scholars as God El. He's wearing an open weave brocaded shawl and broad-brimmed hat, bedecked with owl feathers and a stuffed owl with wings outstretched. He is the patron deity of tobacco and merchants, and he is surrounded by 5 female figures. We don't know if these are daughters or concubines, wives. Not sure the relation of these women to the god. Each of the women wears a flowing sarong with almost batik-like designs. And one of the women is pouring him a drink that is most likely chocolate. Chocolate is very important as part of their ritual ceremonies. Then we also have a rabbit scribe down here. So this rabbit is writing down what's going on, or could be spying. Some scholars think he might be spying on the scene. The god is tying a bracelet on this woman's hand. Now let's talk about what's going on over here. So this seems to be a very kind of nice, peaceful scene, but this over here, not so much. So we have these 2 men wearing these elaborate masks and wielding axes are starting to decapitate this bound figure here, who has been stripped of all his clothing, except for a band around his waist. The victim does have these almost tendrils are coming out to attack this man over here. Now, this scene right here actually mimics a scene from the Popol Vuh, which is a 16th century Quiche Maya mythological narrative where the hero twins trick the lord of the underworld into requesting their own decapitation. Interestingly enough, these hero twins win not through brute strength, but through cunning and trickery. The interesting thing is, so the images that are on this cup is actually probably meant to hold the chocolate beverage. Now, this would have been made with ground cacao beans. This would have not included sugar, so it would have been very bitter tasting. There's a close-up of the rabbit scribe. So here's another image again of the full scene. It might be a little bit easier in some respects to see. And here is one that's been colored in. So you can actually see some of the details, I think, a little bit easier in this one. Specifically, you can see the kind of tendrils that are coming from this man's waist that are coming to attack this man. Now let's go to Tikal. Tikal was a large Mayan site, covered an area of 25 square miles, and in its prime held about 100,000 residents. It was ruled by a single dynasty of over 39 successive rulers. The heart of the site is the Grand Plaza, surrounded by the Central Acropolis, the North Acropolis, and Temples 1 and 2. This is Temple 1. Temple 1 is 145 feet tall. It's sometimes also called the Temple of the Giant Jaguar because the lintel on top depicts a king sitting on a jaguar throne. There is a burial within this pyramid of a ruler identified as Chisa Chan Kawil first. So the tomb was built first, and then the temple was erected around it, leaving the king encased within. The tomb features a large masonry bench on which the king was laid to rest, covered in jade jewelry. And the chamber itself was filled with funerary goods, including shells, pearls, mirrors, jaguar skins, jade objects, and painted ceramics. A set of 37 carved human bones were found piled at the king's right foot. The bones were inscribed with hieroglyphic text which described allegiances with Copan and Palenque, the king's name and parentage. A portrait of a captive named Oxha Ixil, the enemy city of Calakmul, and scenes of the maize deity being carried to the underworld in a canoe. The decorative crown on the roof of the temple is called a roof comb. Roof combs were used in other temples at Tikal as well, and comprised of 2 framework walls leaning against one another, faced with carved stone and covered with stucco plaster. The roof comb features an image of the king flanked by scrolls and serpents. Here's another version of the Temple 1, or Temple of the Giant Jaguar. And here's one with some people, so you really get a sense of the scale. And there is a close-up of the roof comb. And here is an illustration, but the nice thing about the illustration is that it shows what the roof comb would have originally looked like. Again, it's not much to see, and it's hard to identify everything. Here you can actually see a lot more of that. I know this isn't the best resolution, but you can at least see a little bit more. And the other thing is, remember, most of this really would have been brightly colored. So these are some images of the burial. So again, all of the jade and jadeite pieces of jewelry surrounding the king, and there is an image of it being excavated in situ. So now we go to Palenque. Palenque, again, we have temples, terraces, plazas, altars, burial grounds, and of course, a ball court. It was discovered in 1740 when the Spanish priest Antonio de Solis struck a buried wall with a spade while planting a field. At the height, Palenque encompassed an area of 50 square miles. The Temple of the Inscriptions is 75 feet tall. It is called the Temple of the Inscriptions because 3 tablets with inscriptions with the history of Bacal and 180 years of Palenque itself, including 617 glyphs. This temple was built around 670 by Bacal and completed after his death by his son. This temple has 8 levels and a long staircase leading up to 5 entrances in the top rooms. The back of the pyramid butts up to a natural hill. The decorative comb would of course made this temple look taller. Stucco sculptures adorn the pillars of Palenque gods, Bacal's mother and son. Mexican archaeologist Roberto Ruiz Lueller discovered Bacal's tomb in 1952 by removing a stone slab on the floor. It revealed an 82 feet deep stairwell filled with rubble down to the tomb. It took 2 years to clear the passageway, but offered many findings. At the bottom of the stairs was a large stone box containing 6 sacrificial victims. The chamber itself was 29 by 13 feet, had a vaulted ceiling. The coffin was a singular stone block carved out for the body of the king. Here's a close-up of the top of the Temple of Inscriptions, and this actually shows the different tiers again. So this shows the lineage of Bacal. So it has his mother, his father, and his great-great-grandfather. So this shows you where the tomb is in relation to the rest of the temple. So now you can see that long passageway entering into the tomb itself. And you can see some of the magnificent finds there in the tomb. And there is the tomb and the slab that I just was mentioning. The sarcophagus lid shows Pakal, represented by the corn god leaving the underworld. During the winter solstice, a duct allowed sunlight to shine on Pakal just that one day. And here is a close-up of the sarcophagus lid there in the Temple of the Inscriptions. So let's move to Copan and Bonampak. So Copan, the first European description of Copan, appears in a letter to Philip II, King of Spain, dated in 1576. The most famous building of Copan is the hieroglyphic stairway. The stairway provides the history of Copan written in stone, made of 2,200 blocks that form the risers of more than 70 steps. These bear glyphs that record the history of the 16-ruler Copan dynasty. Jacques Soustelle called Bonampak a pictorial encyclopedia of a Mayan city. It was built along the Lacanja River in the 7th and 8th centuries and eventually abandoned to the jungle. It was rediscovered in 1946. Bonampak means painted walls in Mayan. This is the portrait statue of Waxaklon. He was a ruler of Copan. Here's the hieroglyphic stairway that I was mentioning. So you have the 2,200 blocks, the 70 steps, and you can see all of the hieroglyphics on here. Again, here's a close-up of portrait statue. When the tomb for Waxaklon was found, it included a male between 50 and 70 years old. But the interesting thing was that they did tests and that he actually wasn't from Copan, but was probably from Tikal. And they actually can do these tests where they can tell what type of foods and what kind of environment you had whenever you were young. The body was covered in jade shell. There were lots of ceramics surrounding as well as bone offerings. There was also a large amount of cinnabar. So much so they think that the bones appear to have been painted with a cinnabar solution. In the nearby tomb was the remains of a woman in her 50s that was most likely his wife. So this is a detail of a Mayan wall painting. So we have a ruler and a military captain. They're shown with the jaguar pelts there. And then we've got these captives. And you notice that several of these captives seem to be wounded. Some of them seem to be bleeding. You can see the blood droplets there. This mural was actually never finished, partly because Bonampak started to decline before it was ever completely finished. This is the house of the governor at Uxmal. This was the residence for the ruler of Uxmal. It was an administrative center and astronomical marker. The main doorway is aligned precisely with the largest structure of the nearby site, Nopat, which was 6 kilometers away. It is set to track Venus's southernmost arc as it rises over the horizon, just above the Nopat structure. We have intertwined snakes and some 2-headed snakes used for the mask of the rain god Cha. Detail of the governor's house. Here is the nunnery at Chichen Itza. The main part of the nunnery consists of a series of vaulted rooms seated on a 33-foot high platform mound. Some of the rooms were decorated with mural paintings and stone mosaics. The doorway lintels have carved hieroglyphics. Here is a better image of the nunnery. And inside the nunnery is a jaguar throne. It was most likely a stone altar used for human sacrifice. By the way, in case you're wondering why it's called the nunnery, it comes from an wrong interpretation of the first Spanish visitors who, upon seeing the large number of rooms, were reminded of the cell of a monastery. Most archaeologists believe it was a palace for Mayan royalty. Teotihuacan. This is the Pyramid of the Sun. We have the pyramids of the sun and the moon. We've got them one on either side of the area. These are the focal points for Teotihuacan's layout. Pyramid of the Sun is around 207 feet tall and 705 feet square. It is one of the largest structures ever built in the ancient America. Now, a lot of this has been reconstructed. Excavations in 1971 revealed a tunnel-like cave ending in a cloverleaf-shaped set of chambers. It was a place of rituals. This was known as the place of emergence, or the womb, and became symbolic of where the first humans came into the world. Caves are often a key part of creation myths. It's actually thought that the location of this temple was due to the location of this underground cave that was found, and they built a temple on top of it. Pyramid of the Sun is the largest structure in Teotihuacan and the second largest in Mesoamerica. It's the third largest pyramid in the world. And here's one with some people so you can get the idea of the massive scale. And there is the underground cave. And some of the artifacts found in the underground cave. The Great Goddess. So this is an upper part of a mural. Your book actually kind of clips it a little bit. Here's more of the mural. I think it's helpful to see. The Great Goddess, this is a tree deity. As you can see the tree coming out from her. So we've got the Great Goddess there in the center. And then we have two priests on either side wearing hawk headdresses. They are carrying tribute bags and wearing slippers with these great little pom-poms on top of them. That particular footwear is also seen on a stele at Quirigua and the Pyramid of the Plumed Serpents. The Great Goddess also wears a hawk headdress. You can see her masked eyes, round ear flares. Think of ear flares as like the gauges that some people wear in their ears today. She has a nose bar. It has pendants dangling from it. And those are thought to resemble spider fangs. So some people actually refer to her as the Spider Woman. Now you can see that there is a liquid dripping from her hands. That's either blood or water. So in this case, we've got these two priests giving offerings to the goddess. That's kind of unusual to see these priests, these more normal people. Typically, you would see a divine ruler giving these offerings to the god or goddess. So this is a relief panel depicting the sacrifice of a ball play. The ancient Maya called the ball game pt2, and it was a very important part of Mayan political, religious, and social life. They played it with a large rubber ball. Now, when you think of a rubber ball, you're probably thinking of a ball that was actually filled with air. Now remember, this would have been a solid rubber ball. These rubber balls ranged in size from softball to soccer ball. Some weigh about 10 pounds. So think about that coming at you. You would attempt to bounce the ball without using your hands through stone hoops attached to the sides of the ball court. So there's an image of a court and one of the hoops. The layout was typically in an I shape, and you would have large areas for spectators, as you can see here. Stone court markers known as hacha, depicting animals or skulls, were placed around the arena. To protect your ribs and torso, players would wear a yoke of leather or wood around their waist. Some of the larger balls would weigh even up to 20 pounds. Now, the story of the beginning of the ball game actually starts with the hero twins and the maize gods. This is again from the Mayan Book of Creation, the Popol Vuh. So how the story goes is the maize gods were avid ball players who were killed and buried on the court by the lords of Xibalba, or the underworld, for bothering them with the noise of the game. The head of one of the maize gods was hung from a tree in the underworld, and as a daughter of the lord of the underworld passes, it spit into her palm, miraculously impregnating her. The daughter bore twin sons, the hero twins, who avenged their father and uncle's death by resurrecting them on the ball court. The hero twins go on to survive the ordeals of hell presented to them by the death gods, while the reborn maize gods remain on the ball court for humans to honor. This is kind of the story of the beginnings of the ball game. Now, one of the important things to know was that oftentimes the losing team would be sacrificed. Here's some more artist renderings of what they thought the game was played. And here's a plan of Teotihuacan. Pyramid of the Niches. This is in El Tajín, Veracruz. El Tajín flourished at the same time as the Maya, and it's thought that the builders of El Tajín and the Maya had a trade relationship. This is called the Pyramid of the Niches because of these holes or niches. There are 365 representing the solar year, and it is an almost nearly perfectly symmetrical building. And there's a close-up. And another side. Here is a pair of ear flares made out of jade and a necklace made out of jade that we have at the museum. So imagine having gauges that large, but also that heavy. So remember, these are stone, so they're very, very heavy ear flares. Here are two jaguar vases. Jaguar is a very important animal to the Mayans. Now we go to the Mixtecs. The Mixtecs were an amalgam of people. They were never really a unified nation, but they forged alliances among themselves and with other people in the vicinity. They're known for their manuscripts and metalwork. The Mixtec writing is an amalgam of written signs and pictures. This is the Temple of the Warriors and Group of 1,000 Columns. It was built by the Toltec conquerors in 950. It is made with 4 platforms, 200 round and square columns. The Temple of the Warriors was built over a pre-existing structure. It is 131 feet wide. The square columns are carved with images of Toltec warriors, and yes, they were painted. At the top of the stairs is Chacmul. He was considered to be a messenger of the gods, and you would offer religious offerings on a flat area on the figure's stomach. There are thoughts that this is where the beating hearts of sacrificial victims were placed. So this is Pyramid B in Tula Hidalgo. This is also the Toltecs. The temple is made of a series of steps, layers, as you can see here. We have square columns leading up, and then we have these figures. They're called Atlantean figures. The Atlantean figures are each around 15 feet high. They're made out of basalt. They are all identical and static. So static, they're not moving. There's nothing showing movement in there. On one side they hold an atlatl. An atlatl was a throwing spears, and on the other side they hold a purse of copal, and this is usually associated with priests. So the idea is that they have the combination of military and religious aspects. These are linked to a well-known mythological king of Tula, Quetzalcoatl, as well as Quetzalcoatl's astral aspect, Venus. So the heads are covered with a headgear made of wide headbands decorated with mosaics topped with feathers. They wear a triangular apron lined with pearls tied on the front and shoes that are open-toed. You can see all their toes. On the heels, there are low reliefs depicting the feathered serpent. These figures were painted white, red, blue, and green. The wedding of King 8 Deer to Lady 13 Serpent of Flowers. This is a detail from the page of the Codex Nuttall. This is a wedding scene. So we have these two figures facing each other and sitting on jaguar pelt chairs. Lady 13 Snake is holding a cup of chocolate. This may represent a dowry because chocolate or cacao was one of the most expensive and luxurious products in Mesoamerica, and the cacao beans were oftentimes used as currency. And here's another page from the Codex Nuttall. And here's another one. Now we go to the Aztecs and the founding of Tenochtitlan. The Codex Mendoza is an Aztec codex created around 20 years after the Spanish conquest of Mexico. It was made for Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. It contains a history of the Aztec rulers and their conquests, a list of the tribute paid by the conquered, and a description of daily Aztec life, and traditional Aztec pictograms with Spanish explanations. Codex Mendoza comes from Antonio de Mendoza, who was the then viceroy of New Spain and who commissioned this piece. After it was created in Mexico City, it was sent by ship to Spain. However, the fleet was attacked by French privateers, and the codex, along with the rest of the treasures, were taken to France. There, it became into the possession of André Thevet, who is a cosmographer to King Henry II of France. Thevet wrote his name in 5 places on the codex, twice with the date of 1553. It was later bought by the Englishman Richard Hakluyt for 20 French francs. Sometime after 1616, it was passed to Samuel Purchas, then to his son, then to John Selden. The codex was deposited into the Bodleian Library at Oxford University in 1659. It remained there in obscurity until 1831, when it was rediscovered by Viscount Kingsborough and brought to the attention of scholars. So this was created after the Spanish conquest, but it had to do with the Aztec culture. Stone of 5 Suns, or the Aztec calendar stone. It depicts 5 consecutive whirls of the sun from Aztec mythology. It is a carved solar disk, not a functioning calendar. At the top of the stone is a date glyph, 13 reed, which represents both the beginning of the present sun, the 5th and final one according to mythology, and the actual date, 1427. It is during the rule of Itzcoatl, who took power that year. The stone was discovered in 1790 in the Central Plaza of Mexico City and is now in the National Museum of Anthropology. It is carved from basalt. It was part of the Temple Mayor and weighs 25 tons. The diameter is 11 feet 10 inches. It would originally have been laid flat on the ground and probably was used for blood sacrifices on top. When it was discovered, the stone was actually lying flat upside down. So the idea is that maybe it was turned that way in order to prevent the final cataclysm, the fall of the 5th and final sun. At the center of the stone is a representation of either the sun god Tonatiuh, the day sun, or Yahuwah Tonotia, the night sun, or Tlachuchuli, the primordial earth monster. The earth monster destroys the world when the 5th sun falls to earth. The tongue there that you see sticking out of the central figure suggests a thirst for blood and sacrifice. Around the central face at 4 points are the other 4 suns, which successively replaced each other after the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca struggled for control of the cosmos until the era of the fifth sun was reached. The suns are known by the day name on which their final destruction occurred. Beginning at the top right, there is the first sun for Jaguar. The top left is the second sun for Wind. The bottom left third sun is for Rain, and the bottom right is for Water. On either side of the central face are two jaguar heads, each clutching a heart. The band immediately surrounding the suns is segmented into 20 Aztec day names, hence the name calendar stone. There is a decorative ring surrounded by another ring depicting symbols which represent turquoise and jade, symbols of the equinoxes and solstice and the colors of the heaven. The heads at the bottom center represent fire serpents. These represent the fire serpents. And here you have a real sense of how large the piece is. And here explains what some of the glyphs mean. And this is actually an Aztec deity figure we have at the museum. Again, we've got a figure with the ear flares and necklace, so sort of probably made out of jade and bracelets. Going into contemporary, we have Diego Rivera. This is a mural, the great city of Tenochtitlan. So in 1345, the Aztecs, or Mexica, as they called themselves, founded the city of Tenochtitlan in the middle of Lake Texcoco. So the Aztecs built Tenochtitlan on the spot where a vision appeared to them, an eagle perched on a cactus eating a serpent. For decades after the city was founded, Aztecs dredged the lake bottom for mud to build up the city's foundation. By the time Moctezuma II came to power in 1502, Tenochtitlan had an impressive city connected to the mainland by a series of stone bridges. The city had temples, pyramids, palaces, marketplace. Stone-edged canals carried thousands of people through the city daily. So that's what you're seeing Diego Rivera, who is the well-known Mexican muralist. He is trying to illustrate the wonderful heritage that the contemporary Mexican people had, trying to showcase this history in a contemporary context. So this is the full mural, so you can see the whole piece here. And last is Frida Kahlo, the two Fridas. So Frida Kahlo, oftentimes considered a surrealist painter, even though she herself never considered herself to be. She did an amazing number of self-portraits, and this is one of them. And this is representing the two aspects of her personality. So you have her European heritage as well as her indigenous heritage. So you've got the two sides of her being illustrated in this. And you have them physically connected by these blood vessels. The hearts are connected. The thing right here in her hand, that's actually an image of Diego. So Frida Kahlo was married to Diego Rivera. They actually got divorced when he had an affair with her sister. Then they remarried soon after. They both ended up having multiple affairs, but they stayed married after that. So this is really showcasing, again, sides of her personality as well as the heartbreak, literally, that she is enduring at this time.